Good, now hold the position. Hold it. Good, don't break. Don't break.
In the summer of 1987, a little movie about dancing, first love, and standing up for what's right became a cultural phenomenon. Nobody expected it to change cinema forever, launch careers, and create moments that would be quoted for decades. But behind that iconic lift and those unforgettable dance sequences, there was tension, injury, improvisation, and near disasters that almost destroyed the film before audiences ever saw it. Here are Dirty Dancing's 15 shocking behind-the-scenes secrets. Secret number 15. Patrick Swayze hated the famous line.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
The most quoted line from Dirty Dancing almost didn't happen. When Patrick Swayze read the script and saw Johnny Castle's introduction, he cringed. He thought it was corny, way too on the nose, and not something a cool dance instructor would actually say. He fought with the writers and director Emile Ardolino about it, suggesting alternatives that felt more natural. But the creative team insisted. They believed it captured Johnny's confidence and set up his character perfectly. Swayze finally agreed to say it, but he remained convinced it would be one of the movie's weakest moments. When the film became a massive hit and that line became one of cinema's most memorable, Swayze had to eat his words. Audiences loved it. It became part of pop culture. People still quote it at weddings, parties, and anywhere dancing is involved. Swayze later admitted he was completely wrong about it. Secret number 14. Jennifer Grey's nose job nearly ended her career. After Dirty Dancing wrapped, but before it was released, Jennifer Grey made a decision that would haunt her career for years. She had rhinoplasty to change her nose, something she'd been self-conscious about. The surgery was successful in the technical sense, but it completely altered her appearance. When Dirty Dancing became a phenomenon and Grey was suddenly famous, nobody recognized her. She'd walk into auditions, and casting directors who'd loved her in the film wouldn't realize it was the same actress. The distinctive look that had made Baby memorable was gone. Grey has spoken openly about how the nose job, which she thought would help her career, essentially ended her moment of stardom.
And Jennifer Grey ruined her career, ruined her face, took away everything unique about her by being a slave to plastic surgery.
She went from being the lead in one of the biggest movies of the decade to struggling to get work because she no longer looked like Jennifer Grey. It's one of Hollywood's most tragic examples of how a personal decision can have devastating professional consequences. Secret number 13. The lake lift took hours and hours to get right.
Good.
The famous lift in the lake, one of cinema's most iconic images, was absolutely miserable to film. The water in that Virginia lake was freezing cold. It was early in the morning. Swayze and Grey had to do take after take after take, staying in that frigid water for hours. Grey kept laughing when she shouldn't, or mistiming her jump, or losing her balance. Swayze's back was already injured from the intense choreography, and lifting Grey repeatedly in unstable water, while cold and exhausted, was excruciating. The crew was getting frustrated. The actors were getting irritable with each other. Swayze later said it was one of the hardest things he'd done for any movie. Not because the lift itself was technically difficult, but because of the conditions and the number of attempts required. When they finally got the perfect take, everyone was relieved. But watching the finished scene, you'd never know the struggle behind it. It looks effortless, romantic, the perfect moment of freedom and joy.
One more time.
Okay. Over my head, go.
Secret number 12. Patrick Swayze choreographed much of his own dancing. Swayze wasn't just an actor who could dance. He was a trained dancer who'd studied ballet, performed professionally, and understood movement at a deep level. When he was cast as Johnny Castle, he brought his own expertise to the role. Many of Johnny's movements, improvisations, and stylistic choices came from Swayze, rather than choreographer Kenny Ortega. The scene where Johnny practices his dance moves alone. The way he moves through the resort. The subtle gestures that show his character through dance. Those were Swayze's contributions. He and Ortega worked closely together, with mutual respect for each other's vision. But Swayze had strong opinions about how Johnny would move, how he'd carry himself, what kind of dancer he'd be. The final performance is a blend of Ortega's choreography and Swayze's personal artistry. It's part of why Johnny Castle feels so authentic, why audiences believed in him as a dancer first and actor second. Secret number 11. The movie was nearly pulled from theaters. After 1 week, when Dirty Dancing was first released in August 1987, it opened in only a handful of theaters. The studio, Vestron Pictures, had minimal faith in it. Early box office numbers were weak. Theater owners complained. Vestron executives seriously discussed pulling the film after just 1 week and dumping it straight to video. But something unexpected happened. Word of mouth started spreading. Teenage girls came back for second and third viewings. They brought friends. Mothers and daughters went together. The audiences were small but passionate, and they were growing. Theater owners in those initial locations started reporting that while opening weekend was soft, subsequent days were getting stronger. Vestron made the gamble to keep it in theaters and gradually expand distribution. By the time it went wide, momentum was building. It ended up becoming one of 1987's biggest hits, staying in theaters for months, eventually grossing over $200 million worldwide on a $6 million budget. The movie that almost went straight to video became a cultural phenomenon. Secret number 10. Jennifer Grey and Patrick Swayze had serious tension.
2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, don't lean back.
Despite their incredible on-screen chemistry, Grey and Swayze had a complicated relationship during filming. They'd worked together before on Red Dawn, and certain personality differences that started there intensified on Dirty Dancing. Swayze was a perfectionist who took the work extremely seriously. He'd practice for hours, demanded precision, got frustrated when things weren't executed correctly. Grey was more playful, sometimes giggled during takes, approached scenes with a lighter energy. This fundamental difference in working styles created friction. Swayze felt Grey wasn't taking it seriously enough. Grey felt Swayze was too intense and hard on her. There were arguments. There were days they didn't speak except when cameras were rolling. The irony is that their tension created a dynamic that worked beautifully on screen. Baby's initial intimidation around Johnny, the push and pull between them, the eventual breakthrough into mutual respect and love, all of that was fueled partly by their real relationship. They weren't pretending in those early scenes where Baby is nervous and Johnny is impatient. Years later, both actors acknowledged the difficulty, but also recognized that maybe the tension served the film. Secret number 9. The Dirty Dancing budget was incredibly small. $6 million sounds like decent money, but for a feature film with elaborate dance sequences, multiple locations, period costumes, and a substantial cast, it was next to nothing. Every penny had to be stretched. The resort scenes were filmed at Mountain Lake Lodge in Virginia, which they got for a good deal because it wasn't peak tourist season. Many of the extras were locals who worked for free or minimal pay just to be in a movie. The dance competition scenes used real dancers from the area. Costumes were bought at thrift stores or borrowed. The famous final dance sequence, which looks like a big production number, was shot quickly with a limited budget for extras and staging. Kenny Ortega had to be incredibly creative with choreography, using camera angles and cutting to make numbers look bigger than they were. The small budget meant long days, minimal takes, and constant problem solving. But it also created a scrappy, independent film energy. Everyone was working hard because they believed in the project, not because they were getting rich. That passion shows in the final product. Secret number 8. Patrick Swayze injured his knee badly during filming. Early in the production, Swayze seriously injured his knee during one of the more acrobatic dance sequences. It was painful enough that doctors told him he should stop dancing entirely, let it heal, possibly have surgery. But stopping meant shutting down production, which the tiny budget couldn't afford. Swayze made the decision to push through. He had the knee heavily taped and braced. He took painkillers to get through the dance scenes. He modified some movements to protect the knee while still making them look good on camera. The pain was constant and severe. Some days he could barely walk between takes. But he never complained to the crew, never let it show on screen. Watching the film, you'd never know he was dancing on a badly injured knee through most of production. This was characteristic of Swayze's professionalism and toughness, but it also took a toll on his body. The knee never fully healed and troubled him for years afterward. He always said it was worth it for the film, but the sacrifice was real. Secret number 7. The abortion subplot was controversial.
She said the hospital would call the police. She made me promise. He didn't use no E.
In 1987, putting an abortion storyline in what was marketed as a romantic drama was risky. The studio was nervous. Some test audiences reacted negatively. There were discussions about cutting it entirely or softening it significantly. But writer Eleanor Bergstein, who based the script partly on her own experiences at resorts in the early 1960s, fought to keep it. She argued that it was historically accurate, that illegal abortions were a reality for many women in that era, and that removing it would sanitize the story. Director Emile Ardolino supported her. They kept the subplot but tried to handle it carefully, making it a plot point that drives the story forward while also treating it with appropriate seriousness. When the film was released, there was some criticism from conservative groups, but it didn't hurt the box office. For many young women who saw the film, Baby's courage in helping Penny and standing up to her father became an important part of what made the movie meaningful. It showed that the film was about more than just dancing and romance. It had something to say about class, about women's choices, about moral courage.
Who's responsible for this girl? I am.
Secret number 6. The final dance was largely improvised. The climactic dance sequence, where Johnny comes back and everyone joins in, was much less choreographed than it appears. Kenny Ortega had an outline, certain key moments planned, but much of what happens on screen came from the actors and dancers improvising in the moment. The energy of the scene, the way everyone jumps in, the spontaneous movements, those weren't tightly scripted. Ortega encouraged the cast to just dance, to react naturally, to let the moment happen. Patrick Swayze's decision to pull Baby on stage, the way he moves through the crowd, many of those choices were made in the moment. The other dancers responded authentically, joining in, creating the sense of a community coming together through music and movement. This improvisational approach gave the scene its electricity, its feeling of genuine joy and rebellion. It couldn't have been achieved through tight choreography. It needed that freedom, that risk, that sense of anything could happen. Secret number 5. The watermelon line was completely improvised.
I carried a watermelon.
One of the film's most memorable funny moments, Baby's awkward entrance with the watermelon, wasn't in the original script. The line was improvised by Jennifer Grey during rehearsal. She was trying to find Baby's character, this sheltered girl who wants so badly to seem cool and sophisticated, but keeps saying the wrong thing.
I carried a watermelon.
When she delivered the line, everyone cracked up. It was so perfectly awkward, so quintessentially Baby. Director Emile Ardolino immediately knew they had to keep it. He worked it into the scene. That line became iconic because it captured exactly who Baby was. Earnest, trying hard, not quite smooth, but endearing in her awkwardness. It's become one of the most quoted lines from the film, right up there with the famous introduction. And it exists because Grey understood her character well enough to find that moment of truth. Secret number 4. Patrick Swayze wrote and performed the love song. Swayze wasn't just a dancer and actor, he was also a singer-songwriter. When the filmmakers were looking for songs for the soundtrack, Swayze had written something he thought might fit. He'd composed a ballad and was hesitant to pitch it, worried it might seem presumptuous. But he played it for the producers, and they loved it. The song made it onto the soundtrack and became a significant hit on its own, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. For Swayze, having his own composition on the best-selling soundtrack of 1987 was incredibly meaningful. It wasn't just acting in the film, it was contributing to its musical identity. The song's romantic, yearning quality fit perfectly with the film's tone. Audiences connected with it deeply, many not even realizing that Johnny Castle himself had written and performed it. Secret number 3. The movie was filmed in the wrong season. The story is set in the summer of 1963, but production took place in fall and early winter of 1986. This created constant challenges. The leaves were changing colors and falling, which didn't match the summer setting. The crew had to carefully frame shots to avoid showing autumn foliage. They had to rake leaves before takes. The weather was cold, especially for those lake scenes and outdoor dance sequences, where actors had to pretend it was hot summer. Everyone was wearing light summer clothing while freezing. Between takes, they'd wrap in blankets and coats, then strip down to their summer costumes for filming. The swimming pool scenes were particularly brutal, filming in water that was nowhere near comfortable swimming temperature. Jennifer Grey later recalled shivering so hard between takes that her teeth chattered uncontrollably. The crew kept hot towels and space heaters ready, but the actors could only warm up for a few minutes before they had to get back in the water. The famous poolside scenes where everyone looks relaxed and sun-soaked required acting skills beyond just the dialogue and dancing. They had to pretend their bodies weren't screaming from the cold. The outdoor mambo scenes at night were even worse. The temperature would drop into the 40s, and the dancers were in sleeveless dresses and short-sleeved shirts. The crew rigged additional lighting not just for visibility, but to provide some warmth. Still, you can occasionally spot actors whose skin looks a bit too pale, or whose movements are slightly stiff from the cold if you watch carefully. The actor's visible breath had to be edited out or avoided through careful shooting angles and timing. Mountain Lake Lodge, where they filmed, actually benefited from the off-season timing with reduced rates, but it meant dealing with Virginia mountain weather in October and November. Morning shoots often started with frost on the ground that had to be swept away. The lake where they filmed the iconic lift scene was frigid, making those already difficult shots even more challenging. The wrong season filming was purely a budget decision, shooting when the location and crew were available rather than waiting for actual summer. It made everything harder, but they managed to sell the illusion of summer through careful cinematography and the actors' commitment to pretending they weren't freezing. Secret number 2. The movie revived oldies music.
I've been waiting for so long, now I finally found some.
When Dirty Dancing became a hit, something unexpected happened with the soundtrack. The mix of 1960s oldies and 1980s new songs introduced a younger generation to music from decades before they were born. Suddenly, songs from the early 1960s were getting radio play again. Artists who hadn't had hits in 25 years were back on the charts. The Contours, Maurice Williams, and the Zodiacs, Solomon Burke. These names from the early rock and soul era found new audiences. Record stores reported increased sales of oldies compilations. Radio stations added oldies formats or expanded their throwback programming. The soundtrack spent 18 weeks at #1 on the Billboard 200 chart, an almost unheard-of achievement. It sold over 32 million copies worldwide, making it one of the best-selling soundtracks of all time. But beyond the commercial success, it changed how Hollywood thought about music in films. Studios realized that nostalgia was marketable, that younger audiences would embrace older music if it was presented in the right context. This led to a wave of films in the late 1980s and early 1990s that featured classic oldies on their soundtracks. The film created a nostalgia boom that extended far beyond its own success. Parents and grandparents who danced to these songs in their youth shared them with children and grandchildren through the film. High school proms started featuring more 1960s music. Wedding DJs reported increased requests for songs from the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. Record companies began reissuing compilation albums specifically marketed to the Dirty Dancing audience. The songs became forever linked with the film in popular culture. Whenever certain tracks played on the radio, people thought of specific scenes. The music wasn't just background, it was integral to the story, to the emotion, to the memory of watching the film. It became a bridge between generations, with the soundtrack serving as introduction to an era of music many young people knew nothing about. Musicians from that era suddenly found themselves with renewed careers, playing to audiences that included people who weren't even born when the songs were first released. Secret number 1. The movie almost had a completely different ending. The ending we know and love with Johnny returning for the final dance and Baby's father's approval, wasn't the original plan. Early script drafts had much darker, more ambiguous endings. In one version, Johnny left and never came back. Baby returning to her regular life forever changed, but without him. The summer would end, she'd go back to school, and the experience would remain a bittersweet memory of first love that couldn't last. In another version, the romance ended, but with more sadness, suggesting they'd never see each other again. Their different social classes making any future relationship impossible. Writer Eleanor Bergstein's original vision was grittier and more realistic about class divisions and how summer romances typically end. She wanted to show that while the experience transformed Baby, not every story gets a Hollywood ending. The script emphasized that Johnny and Baby came from different worlds, and in 1963, those worlds didn't easily merge. This more realistic approach would have left audiences with something to think about, rather than just feel good about. Test audiences hated these endings. They'd invested emotionally in Johnny and Baby's relationship for the entire film, and wanted to see it triumph. They wanted Johnny to come back. They wanted Baby's father to finally understand and give his blessing. They wanted to believe that love could overcome class barriers and social expectations. The test screening cards were overwhelmingly negative about the darker endings, with many people saying they felt cheated or disappointed. The filmmakers faced a difficult decision. They could stick with the more artistically ambitious, realistic ending, or they could give audiences what they wanted. The studio pushed hard for the happy ending, knowing it would play better commercially. After much debate, they rewrote and reshot, creating the uplifting, cathartic ending that made it to theaters. They added Johnny's return, the big final dance, Dr. Houseman's acceptance and respect, and that final moment of validation for both Johnny and Baby. Some critics felt the happy ending was too tidy, that it compromised the film's more serious themes about class, about illegal abortion, about the social barriers of the early 1960s. They argued that the Hollywood ending undercut the more realistic elements of the story. But audiences loved it. They wanted to leave the theater feeling good, believing that love and courage could win, that standing up for what's right would be rewarded. That ending is a big reason the film became the phenomenon it did. People left smiling, satisfied, emotionally fulfilled, ready to tell their friends to go see it. The happy ending turned what might have been a respected indie drama into a crowd-pleasing blockbuster that people wanted to watch again and again. Dirty Dancing wasn't just a movie about dancing. It was about finding yourself, standing up for what's right, and the transformative power of taking risks. The behind-the-scenes story is just as compelling as what made it to the screen, full of struggle, improvisation, tension, and triumph. It's the kind of lightning-in-a-bottle magic that happens rarely in Hollywood, when everything somehow comes together despite the odds. If you enjoyed discovering these secrets, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more fascinating stories from your favorite classic films. Let me know in the comments which behind-the-scenes secret surprised you the most, or if you have memories of seeing Dirty Dancing when it first came out.